Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Anyegulu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, my guest today is ranked as one of Nigeria's most accomplished international exports, attaining the position of United Nations Assistant Secretary General and serving as Regional Director for Africa at the International Labour Organization, a UN specialized agency. She also worked as Regional Program Director for the United Nations Fund for Women and as a project coordinator at the World Bank. Today, Regina Amadi-Njoku is one of Africa's foremost development specialists and is much sought after in both the public and private sectors for her rights-based, gender-responsive approach to African governance and development. The indefatigable award-winning Regina Amadi-Njoku coming up. Now, through the years, she ascended the heights at the United Nations to become one of the most accomplished and respected women of African origin in the organization. And through those years, Regina Amadi-Njoku has made gender equality one of the central issues in international labor affairs, taking center stage as the Regional Director for Africa at the UN's International Labour Organization, and later still rising to the enviable position of United Nations Assistant Secretary General from 2000 to 2008, serving under both Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon. In addition, there were stints at the World Bank and a lectureship at Howard University in Washington, not to mention the fact that she's the recipient of several honors and awards, including the prestigious African Achievers Award for Excellence in Women Leadership 2020. The book she co-authored on culture, gender, and African women leadership has become essential reading for anyone interested in the interplay of culture and gender on development. Take a listen to Regina Amadi-Njoku addressing a virtual World Summit on gender issues in Africa recently.
A boy is born in a village in Ghana, and the Akan language says, Wawonipa, she has given birth to a human being. She, the mother, has given birth to a human being, and is said with a lot of joy and celebration. When a baby girl is born, she doesn't receive that kind of announcement, nor does she get that kind of celebration. What does that tell us? Men and boys are superior in value, human value, to women and girls. Men and boys are 100% full human beings, and women and their girls are not 100% full human beings. These are serious implications for the struggle for gender equality. Let me share with you 2 or 3 serious implications of this. The justification, the impunity and perpetration of gender-based violence and discrimination against women and girls from womb to tomb. A baby can be killed in the womb because she's a girl. The preference is for a boy. Then, when women and girls access to leadership, assets, ownership, power, even to participate fully in governance or in public spheres of development, is practically limited or even nil. Now, an area we can see this playing out at the moment, in spite of all the efforts, clamor, enthusiasm of everybody, is gender pay equality.
And I'm suitably delighted to say that the effulgent Regina Amadi-Njoku joins me now in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much for
We're very honored to have somebody as important as you here.
Thank you.
What was the career path that took you from Nigeria all the way to the top echelons of the United Nations and kept you there for so many years. What kicked off the initial spark for you?
Funny, I feel my childhood actually prepared me for international development.
I was going to get to your childhood, but please go ahead.
Yes, I first started, ironically, after schooling in Nigeria. The nun said I should do medicine. I could do anything, but they felt medicine, I could do it. And I started medicine.
So you were science inclined?
Yes, science, and I could do anything. I was very good, and they felt I could. So I went for medical school, started. 3 months later, I dropped out.
Where was the medical school?
It was in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Louvain University.
That's extraordinary.
Yes, and it's a Catholic university. We were the first blacks to go there, all white kids, before independence, after independence, just after independence. So I realized that I really want to know more about development, African development. So I switched my major from medicine to first French philology and then sociology. And that became a path. But when I finished, I married, but not Nigerian. First, I wasn't Nigerian. And then we moved to Washington, where I became a diplomat for his country.
So what country was that?
Republic Democratic of Congo, Kinshasa. So then I got into a diplomatic corps in my 20s in Washington. And at that time, there were only 3 women diplomats. Myself acting for that country, and then the lady from Sierra Leone and Saudi Arabia. And that's how I ended up, all of a sudden, found myself in the world of diplomats. And then from there, I started again by listening to me, some Nigerian professors at Howard University, and some others said what I was saying. I ended up again lecturing at Howard University.
Which is a very prestigious university
African Studies
there.
Department. Okay, so that was how it all started. But, and then medicine was abandoned.
Well, that's very interesting. And has your own personal achievement professionally convinced you that the women's movement is gaining strength in Africa and beyond? I mean, we're going to get to talk more about that, but just as a kind of precursor.
Yeah, it has gaining already, It's gaining, but irony of it is that African women movement have been on for ages. My grandmother, my great-grandmother had more power than me today. What we do, African women are realizing, we're looking at a renaissance of gender equity, which really may not be equality, but there was a gender equity in our traditional developmental agendas.
Was it gender equity or a division of labor where everybody knew what their place was?
So if you look at sociologists, even in the book, you can Google it today, dual sex governance in most African countries, especially among the Igbos, the Ashantis, the Luvodus in South Africa, you can get many of them where you have men governors and women governors. Today is preserved what Igbos called August meeting. It's still a vestige of it. Yorubas do have this very strongly. The men make their own group and decide, and the caucus. Women caucus. You bring it together. The men are the real, like the Senate, they're the higher chamber, and the women are like the parliament, okay?
The House of Representatives.
Yes. And then the men can never really reach that decision without input from that women. So that was what we had before colonization. The argument we make is that the Western world or Western women activism is different from African women activism.
That's an absolutely fascinating theory. Now, looking at it from that context, was it difficult for you, having now moved away from, because clearly you were in the kind of transition period, you weren't the same as your mother, obviously. I mean, was it difficult for you as a married woman coming from a fairly conservative country such as Nigeria to create a separate identity for yourself from your husband?
Yes and no. There is a sort of, we are playing on two levels. The society, home, family, tradition, I have power. I have decision making. But in the informal sector, and the man knows that he will work with me in that as partner. But once he moves into the workplace, the formal space, I'm not there with him. Because that's the way the colonial power did it. They created this, it's a sort of dichotomy. We have men and women shared power mechanisms in African traditions, but it's not unequal, it's asymmetrical.
Right.
The white man has only men-only governors. There are no women.
So how difficult was it for you at the outset to get your foot in the door? I mean, because it sounds like it was firmly shut to you as a woman in the Western world.
Yes, in the Western world, you see, education. There was something that happened to women in Africa. Western education gave you some passport to the game. But getting a ticket and key is always, you find it in the book.
It was a big challenge.
It's a big challenge, but it's usually your father.
Okay, well, let me ask you to hold that thought, because I'm going to come straight back to you, but I'm afraid I have to take a break.
Okay.
But it sounds absolutely enthralling. You're watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the former UN Assistant Secretary General and former Regional Director for Africa at the UN's International Labour Organization, Regina Amadi-Njoku. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Now, she's won prestigious awards in leadership, diplomacy, lecturing, authoring, and mentorship as she continues her indefatigable advocacy for gender partnership and equality across Africa and the world. My guest today, Regina Amadi-Njoku, served as the Assistant Director General and Regional Director for Africa at the International Labour Organization with the rank of United Nations Assistant Secretary General. She also worked as a project coordinator at the World Bank and as Regional Program Director of West Africa for the United Nations Fund for Women, as well as a lecturer at Howard University in Washington. Currently, she's on the advisory board of Coca-Cola in the US, among others, and travels extensively writing and lecturing on development and gender-related issues.
Culture and gender-driven challenges must be given culture and gender-driven solutions. How do we do that? We must put culture and gender at the center of gender equality struggle. We must now, our men must accept that they are equal partners, equal stakeholders in the issue. We are struggling with gender equality, and political will must be there, or else we cannot continue. We will not have any result. Why? Because we will continue to pursue gender equality with the lead of the men and society who have the same mindsets that distinguishes between the value of a woman and the value of a man.
That's the former UN Assistant Secretary General there. And of course, the remarkable Regina Amadi-Njoku is still with me in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And before we went on a break, and before we proceed, you were talking about you fighting to get your foot in the door because it was, because it was firmly shut. Because you were a woman, or did that open preferentially for you because you were a woman, and therefore you had an easy time climbing the ladder, which is what some people think that women tend to have?
It depends now on generation. My own generation, my children, my daughters have some easier task going through that door. I will tell you, we are prepared, my generation are prepared by our fathers. My father...
So you had a liberal father?
Yes. The father...
Because it could have gone the other way.
Yes, even when the fathers... I will tell you the story about the project we did in Sierra Leone. It will blow your mind. Even when the fathers are very conservative, will not even want the girls to do anything, when the father understands what is to be gained from the daughter being educated, they really become champions. The area, what opened my door, I keep telling you, my childhood in Lagos, in campus area, where it was that at international place, Brazilian, Togolese, everybody there, and everybody going to school. We went to school, I didn't know, we went to school as a right at the time. But when you finish the degree, what you have, the door, and then there are two people who prepare you. My father gives me the confidence to go to school and step on that stage. My mother gives me a toolkit of how to manage and live like a woman to get on that stage. But you still need a man to really open the door for that stage. This is why men, gender-sensitive men, are critical for really pushing women on the stage. We do have had African presidents, even here in Nigeria, the presidents who have been gender-sensitive, pushing the women in stages, you have seen what has happened to some Nigerian womanhood stage, you know? So it is a job of two. Your father pushed the girls. Your mother prepared them to stay once they are pushed up there. The men community will really help push her there, and her women community will support her and give her role models. This is the way, in my own time, I was lucky it happened.
That's very interesting, and obviously you've achieved a lot in your professional career and in your work to educate both men and women on issues of gender equality. So your experiences, I mean, the advantages you had, you translated that into trying to sort of inspire other people and change society, basically.
Yes. I thought men, African men, when we started writing the book, we went in, I've had this for years, the passion. And at one point, my two African sisters joined. We went in trying to show how women have suffered in getting to leadership, how oppressed have been in getting to leadership, and how we're looking for women role models. We didn't have any. That was something we all suffered from today, even wherever we are. But when we got into it, and 15 women sharing their experiences, we realized that our fathers are really very, very important. And they played a role which has not been fully acknowledged in pushing us up. Okay? And they would do it, as a sociologist, sociologist said, they would do it not really. She put it this way, said, a man's mother, she said, women see us through three B's, B as in boy, your mother is blessed, your daughter is beloved, and your wife might be bitchy. So forgetting that the bitchy one is somebody's beloved daughter, somebody blessed. So men push their daughters well. And those who understand the importance of synergy and cooperation push also the wives, the wives. And when it comes to their mother, they know that the first lesson in leadership, the first lesson in management is given to you by your mother.
That's very interesting. And as you continue to push that gender equality rock, if you like, up the hill, where does that rock stand at the moment? Is it continuing to inch upwards, or has it slipped a few times?
It's continuing to inch upward, but the main, if you look at the video, which it was my keynote at the World Summit on girls, women and girls last year, the main issue, we're nearly there. There are many men now who are beginning to understand their stakeholders, not only advocate for my equality. Because when you see a man, a widow, bearing the wife and with children, the face shows you that loneliness, she's scared. The same thing you see in a widow, a woman has lost. The partnership is lost forever. You understand? So now men are beginning to understand that, but to start from womb, I'm not equal to you. You know that? I'm not equal to you. A baby girl is valued lower than a baby boy, even from the womb. And therefore, when you come out, culture directs rights. That culture really modulates gender. My culture said the man is more important than a woman. Therefore, the baby comes out as a girl. Immediately, her value is lower than that of a boy. It's lower than 400%.
Well, that's a very regrettable thing, although we're aware of it. But let me ask you
that's you said why the rock is not up. That is what you
Okay, that's the reason why.
Yes.
Let me ask you to hold on. We're going to come back to you in a minute. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the former UN Assistant Secretary General and current Development and Gender Equality Advocate, Regina Amadi-Njoku. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Women getting the vote was only one step in the long road towards gender equality. Today, there are still issues of child marriage, domestic violence, genital mutilation, discrimination, and equal pay, to mention just a few. These are issues that have kept gender activists like my guest today, Regina Amadi-Njoku, working tirelessly and continuing the fight for women's rights in Nigeria, Africa, and across the world. Although she herself has achieved more than most men, reaching the heights at the United Nations as Assistant Secretary General, she still believes that the system is rigged against women and is a system that's informed by centuries of negative cultural attitudes and perceptions about women, who they are, and what they can achieve or should be allowed to achieve. In spite of the great strides that have been made, she believes that there's still a long way to go before gender equality is achieved. And the lucent Regina Amadi-Njoku is still with me in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And it sounds like the next step in the work that you do has to be in the political arena. Is that a fair sort of assessment?
Yes, but from the support.
I mean, there's the cultural, but obviously
supporting. Not, I can't be a politician.
No, I don't mean you in particular.
Yes, no, yeah, okay, not me. Okay, but what is happening? You touch here. Everything that happens to a woman, gender rights abuse, violence against women, not being in politics, not being in leadership, starts from valuation. Got what I call gender-human being gap. I tell you a story. This book is being marketed in bookstores. And
That's the book, by the way, just in case you're dying to see it. I think we've actually got a soft copy, which we can put up, but it's a very valuable work.
So I went there, here in Abuja bookstore, 2 young men from Niger, one from Niger State, one from Bauchi, they bought the book. Then I was saying to myself, then he opened it and they sat down and started talking with me in the salon there. Then one of them said, "Madam, something happened to me, I got to change." I said, "What?" He said, "There's a boy of 4 years old, a daughter of 6. He came back, they were quarreling. And then he just told the daughter, 'Shut up, you can't even do this, you can't even control your brother.'" You know, he went up ranting. He said, then he went away. The boy sort of smirked, you know. Then he asked himself, "Oh my God, there were 2. Why am I preserving the boy?" And so he rushed out, apologized to the daughter. Then he told me, he said, "You know, madam, I've been programmed by my father, but I'm sure I'm going now to deprogram myself." So why I'm saying this is that until we look at the gender human being value gap between the baby boy and the baby girl, nothing much is going to change. And I think that is beginning to happen. Because it happens, women come out in crisis. When the world is in crisis, look at almost 80% of women leadership. The lady in Pakistan who was killed, Theresa May, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Catherine Banza. When there is real fire, the men weaponize situation, they go to war easily. Women humanize situations. And it's usually that time the woman leadership sort of springs up. In Nigeria, I see it coming. Because we are now, you know, when that happens, then at that time, her value, we have to look at that. It reflects in everything. Gender gap, look at ILO. 100 years ago we started, before the UN.
That's the International Labour Organization, where you were the director, the UN agent.
Yes, 1919, they started, who started ILO? Women activism, workers in New York, sweatshops, protests, the men joined them. That's how ILO came. Social justice, workers' rights. Now what happened is, that time, gender pay gap was on. 100 years later, it didn't. We're still not there. You are only worth the pay of your worth. 80% of America's destiny, the woman gets it, the man gets 100. That means since that time, a white woman is only worth 80%. By your culture. By my culture in the village, it could be worth 10% or none. So that is the wrench. That is something we need to untie. Gender human being value gap.
But obviously the cultural approach that you're talking about is going to take a much longer time. The short-term approach would have to be some form of legislation. And I'm wondering whether you've been pushing the political side of things.
Yeah, legislation, the political side of things, yes. Men, look at the political side, especially from the point of labor, you know, look at it, you know. If women, the biggest dome of power is the parliament.
Absolutely, the National Assembly in Nigeria.
That is power. You can have as much money as you have. If you don't control that by proxy, as billionaires are doing, look at the case in Washington, okay, you will not really have anything. the social sector will never even be addressed until the people in the dome, okay, understand that their power there depends on economy and social. That is the game. Now, we're women to get there. Men are smart. They know the power of majority. Women have majority. 51%, 50% maybe. They will now know if politics is a game of numbers. So in Africa, African womanhood is divided. The elite and the non-elite. The men go back and talk to the women who matter. Okay? That is rural women, those who will stand in the rain to vote and get the vote. And once they go up there, they forget them and make those of us elite ministers of what, knowing that you have no geopolitical constituency. So you are telling me how we are going to get there. It's happening. Nigerian women, since I came back, they are really understanding. Since I'm looking at, they are mobilizing.
Yes, I've noticed quite a bit of
they
that
are mobilizing.
As well.
We have to reconstruct the sisterhood of our great-grandmothers who had their own governance. You know, in those days, you didn't go and pick up a woman and said, oh, come and do this. You go to the group and describe terms of reference. I need a dancer. I need the women then will send you one of them they know is the best. And if something happens to her, you have to them to do it. So the Nigerian women are going back now to those little traditional strategies.
Right.
And it's working.
So basically the work you do for gender issues is or ought to be on two fronts. One is the political level, where you have to convince governments and those in office to implement policies that are favorable to women. And the other is on the cultural level, trying to shift public attitudes to women. And in this latter area, that's the more difficult challenge, obviously.
Yes, the political is easier because we are talking legislation.
Absolutely.
We are talking bills. How many bills, how many legislations, how many 25 bills in the UN we've had about violence against women? It gets worse. But again, you can't talk about equality of women without putting the equality of men. I will tell you why. African man, to a large extent, is also oppressed. He had lost power by colonization.
That's a good point.
You understand? He is a man in his house, a boy in the office. You understand? And then he's handling these things, frustration, anger, and then he puts it on the woman. You understand? So my brother, my husband, is also suffering.
Although, to be fair, in the context of Nigeria, for example, an independent African country, it's a lot less than you'd find perhaps in the West with African Americans or, you know.
It's even worse. You see, because we've done a lot of studies. You see, the more higher the man, look at the African man, he's in the office, even as the president of Africa, okay? He does not control his agenda. I've worked at the World Bank. You go there and do appraisal and tell them what to, you know, the health sector, the education sector, you know. So, but he knows these people come back and they don't control their resources. You understand? The geopolitical base is not there. The lands are not. The minerals are controlled by outside. You understand? Because why? And they are even our sectors, education, health, and they say, are not even allied and harmonized with their own traditional sectors of health, education. So you have a lot of misalignments, even in governance.
And that has a psychological effect.
Misalignment in sector management.
That's fascinating.
Misalignment in finance. So the old has not met with the new. And we don't know that we're in a hybrid state. We are no longer West, and we're no longer totally African. Something in the middle is coming, like Nigeria. We're no longer a country. We are moving towards nation. But we're somewhere there in the middle that is a bit nebulous and transitional, and is quite discomfortable.
It's like a dialectical process.
Thank you very much.
And you haven't quite got to, you know, there's thesis and antithesis. And then you have a synthesis,
Yes.
and you haven't got to the synthesis.
Thank you.
You're sort of somewhere in between.
You got it.
Fascinating theory.
You got it.
And before we take another break, I mean, how far does your advocacy for women's rights go? Does it include the right of a woman to control her own body, for example, by having access to birth control and by extension things like abortion and so on? Do you see that as a necessary part of women's rights, the whole idea of legal contraception, for example?
No, I would go the other way. A woman should have authority over her body.
Right.
What is it? All these things trying to generalize, one size doesn't fit all. Okay? If you legislate my body, you don't know what is happening. But again, why do we legislate the body? Why are we talking about control? Okay? If you notice, when we were in labor, when the raw material was going up north, okay, and labor is here, is okay. When skilled people went out there and have skills that now send money back, we're talking a lot about birth control. Population control is very much linked into financial flows between north and south. It's very.
You mean the northern hemisphere
and the southern?
Okay, because it's not northern Nigeria and southern. It's sort of hemisphere.
Okay, so
right.
And it links again to migration.
Right.
It links again, but it's not their own. That is bad. But we should manage our own population, because for our population is is linked to productivity. If it is skilled,
right.
If it's given ethics, then you have a good human labor force that really creates good GDP.
Okay, I hate to interrupt you, but I've got to take another break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the development and gender equality advocate and former UN Assistant Secretary General Regina Amadi-Njoku. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Now, after many years at the top of the United Nations career ladder as an Assistant Secretary General and a Regional Director in Africa for the UN agency, the International Labour Organization, Regina Amadi-Njoku now devotes much of her time advocating for development and gender equality. She's created several NGOs and rights organizations and spends much of her time organizing, lecturing, fundraising, and stomping for women's rights and African development, in addition, of course, to slogging from city to city, promoting her excellent book on culture, gender, and African women leadership, which she co-authored with two other prominent gender activists. New thinking, radical ideas, bold analysis, political activism, and raising the consciousness of both women and men. That's how she floats the gender equality boat, working flat out to get rid of the more insidious manifestations and lobbying governments and organizations to adopt equality strategies. And Regina Amadi-Njoku is still with me in the studio. Thank you so much for staying with us. And when we were on a break, you were giving examples of where this development and gender equality paradigm appears to be working in Africa.
Yes. Gender equality paradigm can shoot from 2 or 3 sources. In the case of Ghana, for example, because of the Ghana matriarchal system, okay, they have always, in the book, the Queen Mother, the mother of the Ashantehene now, Ashantehema she was, we interviewed her at age 111, and she told us a lot about gender and development. And Ghanaians are much more attuned to gender partnership, and they have managed to continue to try to integrate it But the main obstacle is still that male-only colonial heritage we got, the garden agenda paradigm. But they're doing well. Then Rwanda. Rwanda, I don't know whether there's any other country that has had so many killings, genocide, self-inflicted than Rwanda. Is in that crisis. You see, when there's crisis and everything is down and you come to reconstruction, the power of the women during the crisis is always interpreted, translated into negotiating dime. They were able, men knew then during the crisis that these women can work, they can lead, they can do, and they were able to share power. And we see that happening. Then you look at Senegal. Senegal is a Muslim country, you would say, but Senegal has about 300 years of interaction with France. Okay? And in Senegalese, the women, even in the 18th century, controlled the economy, and then their religion, Senegalese religion, is not only going to the mosque or going to anywhere, they translate it immediately into political dividend, and the women there know how to do it. Okay? So they have had practices. Even here in Nigeria, we were on a good path. If you remember those who went to Lancaster to negotiate independence, they didn't go male only. They went with 3 women representing the 3 regions, Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti West, Amagleteku East, and Laja Shawaba North. They knew that African governance cannot happen without that. You know, so what I'm saying is that we have the vestiges, the relica of this in our tradition. If we could just say to ourselves, we have to bring it and bring the modern and pull it together and come out with something new, as you said.
But you need a political vision to make that happen.
Yes.
Like a politician who has that vision.
Yes, the vision. Talking about, what about Tanzania? Okay, South Africa, for example, South Africa, they were negotiating ANC women. You know, ANC Women's Wing is exactly, I'm happy to say here that for 4 years, I was a keynote speaker at the parliament in Cape Town, okay, when, in August. They met here like us. The women meet in August to really look at the legislature and the political power, whether they're doing what women have, the kind of contract, social contract they have had with them at the beginning of each administration. You understand? So they have a way of monitoring that, and the men have the avenue and space to really play the part. I must say, too, even in Nigeria, we have had presidents here. I can name a couple of you who whether consciously or unconsciously, have given women opportunity. But we don't want any, we appreciate appointative, but we want elective.
Yes.
And the women, we have to be given space.
So that will tell you that society has actually changed.
We have to be given space. And that's why we're pushing for politics. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, again, I'm glad to say it here, fantastic woman. She knew how to work with us women to make it happen. And then she's lucky that Liberia came out of, you know, America. We already have democracy. So it was easier there for her to do what she needs to do. Different countries, right, in different states.
Well, let me just bring in one thing before we have to go, which is the tap into your experience as somebody who led the International Labour Organization under the UN for several years. You presided over lots of labour issues across Africa. You've mediated in labour disputes, advised governments on all that sort of thing, etc. Why do you think Nigeria is constantly mired in labour disputes, and such disputes keep recurring even after settlements appear to have been reached and acknowledged by both sides?
First of all, when it comes to labor or job creation, the country has to really have a good policy framework. What is strike about is about demand and supply of labor, is about observation of covenants, conventions between two parties.
And chiefly about remuneration.
Yes. Not only remuneration,
right.
There is social security.
Right.
Okay? You can get a job wage, but if you don't have social security, you really don't have a job. Okay? If you don't have a right in the work, and if you don't have a voice, it's a tripartite. ILO is the only one institution in the world that is tripartite. You have government, you have labor, and then you have the employer, private sector. So the people, these three must generate the GDP. Government regulates the relationship between both of them, but one gives labor, the other one takes it. Now, what creates that is that when you have a country that has not really had a serious look at employment policies and is a connectivity to production and economic GDP and economic development, then you will have a lot of upheavals. Conventions are not respected, and that's one level. The other level is a country like Nigeria, how many millions? We are mainly really in the informal sector. Okay, mainly. Don't forget that all these conventions applies only mainly to formal sector, and now we're trying to do that. And when you have that, if governance already is not in the transparent, accountable framework, then it affects also the labor unions.
It has a knock-on effect.
It permits the labor unions.
We've got about 30 seconds before we have to go. Do you find it all a bit tiresome and frustrating sometimes, the slow pace of things? Although you've been, you're not yet showing any signs of putting up your feet, but I mean, are you finding it a bit slow? The pace of development, gender, equality, and all that. We've got about 10 seconds.
Yes, sometimes. But now, when you've been a development specialist, or development, anybody, whatever, you are an optimist.
Okay, so you are optimist.
Yes, okay. But I know we can do it.
Okay, Regina Amadi-Njoku, former UN Assistant Secretary General, I want to thank you exceedingly for coming in.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.